Hi everyone, it's Nick Marzinski from TrappingLight.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to talk about plugins. For those of you that aren't familiar with plugins, basically they're third-party software packages that aren't made by Adobe that allow you to make additional edits to your image that would either be very difficult to do or impossible to do within Photoshop. So, for example, I can make an image look really gritty within Photoshop just using the tools that I've got there, but it's going to require a bunch of adjustment layers and blend mode changing and that sort of thing. So with the image that I'm working on now, that I've been working on for the past several videos, if I know that I want to make it gritty, usually what I'll do is I'll just go right to Topaz Adjust, because I know that I can grit up the image in a fraction of the time that it would take me to do it in Photoshop. So that's the good news for plugins. The bad news is that plugins usually aren't free. And in some cases, they can cost into hundreds of dollars. When you've already spent a bunch of money on Photoshop or Lightroom, having to drop additional money on a plugin isn't much fun. But the reason why I like Topaz's plugins, aside from the fact that they really work, is that they don't break the bank. In the case of Topaz Adjust, it costs $50. However, until the end of September, Topaz is offering Adjust at 50% off. So that's $25. And by the way, Topaz's policy is also, once you buy a plugin, all future updates to that plugin are free. So right now they're on version 5 for Topaz Adjust, but when Topaz Adjust 6 comes out, if you own Topaz Adjust 5, you'll be able to download 6 for free. And their updates, by the way, are usually pretty great. And so that's another reason why I like them. One other thing that you need to understand about plugins is that you need a host program to be able to run them. They're not standalone programs. So for example, I can't get a copy of Adjust and install it on my computer and open it right from my desktop to edit my image. To use Adjust, I have to evoke it from another program. In my case, I'm using Photoshop CS6. However, you can also use Elements as well as Lightroom and any other host programs that Topaz would allow, and that's on their website. However, regardless of which one you use, you're going to need a host editor. So I'm going to jump into Photoshop right now. And this is the image that I've been working on. So I've already selected my image, masked out the background, and retouched it. And now it's time to grunge it up. In order to do that, I'm going to create a new layer using the Control-Shift-Alt-E method. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to maintain a non-destructive workflow. If I bring my image into Topaz just using the image without creating this new layer, any changes that I make in Topaz are going to be affecting my original image pixels. By having a new layer and bringing that new layer into the plugin, I'll only be editing on that layer, so I can always get back to an earlier state of my image. So now that I have my new layer, I'm going to go up here to Filters, go to Topaz Labs, and go to Topaz Adjust 5. When you get a plugin like Topaz and install it on your computer, it will automatically be added into your Filters menu. So click on Topaz Adjust 5, and it brings me right into the plugin. Now, for those of you that use Lightroom, this interface actually should look pretty familiar. You have the effects families on the left side, and right below that, each effects family has its own set of presets within it. Above both of them, right up here, you have a preview window that shows exactly what a preset will look like when I mouse over it. So you can see when I mouse over these presets here, you can see exactly what they'll do to the image. If we go to something like Stylize, there's completely different presets that you've got available, and again, there's some pretty funky ones. Again, you mouse over them and they show you exactly how they work. And by the way, I should point out that there's a lot of presets to choose from, probably several hundred. Okay, in this case, when I'm looking for a gritty look, I'm going to go into the vibrant selection and mouse over the presets until I find one that I like, and then I'm going to click on it. And I think for this one, I'm going to go with Gritty 2. After I've selected my preset, I can go over to the right side of the window to fine-tune it. Okay, and there's 3 sections here. There's a global adjustments, a local adjustments, and a finishing touches. The global adjustments, as you would expect, affect the entire image. The first drop down here for adaptive exposure is really Topaz's secret sauce. This adaptive exposure slider right up here applies contrast and tone edits very, very selectively to the image. So you can see as I bump it up, it's making these edits, and it's getting a little bit more saturated, but also a little bit crunchier. Okay. Below that, there's a region slider. Now, The region slider is a little bit difficult to understand, but basically what it does is it tells Topaz how selective it should be with its adaptive edits. The further that slider, you drag that slider to the right, the more selective Topaz gets, the more regions it's splitting the image up to apply this adaptive saturation. So what you can see as I'm moving the region slider is that this adaptive exposure is getting a little bit more selective. And actually, the way it looks, I think that it looks better when I have fewer regions. Drag that up just a little bit more. Below that, there's contrast and brightness sliders that do pretty much exactly what you'd expect. There are also those two sliders to protect the highlights and protect the shadows. Okay. In this case, if I drag the protect highlights slider over, what you can see is that it's making my background gray because it thinks my background is a blown out highlight. It wants to protect that. So in this case, I'm not going to use the protect highlights at all. Dragging the protect shadow slider usually brightens up the shadows a little bit so they don't clip. In this case, I actually rather like it with maybe just a little bit more brightness in the shadows. From there, we can go into the details section. Again, this works on the individual details of the image, so you can really make it look very crunchy or very smooth. Generally, I try and be pretty restrained here. Okay, it's set to 1.3. If I drag it all the way to the side here, that is way too detailed. That looks absolutely horrible. So again, I usually use very minor slider moves to get it to where I want it. Same thing with the detail boost. It's very easy to go really overboard with that. And so generally, slow and steady wins the day there. And I should point out when I'm doing all this that there's really not a magic formula to how to adjust your image within this plugin for it to work. When I'm in this program, I just simply play with the sliders until I get a look that I like. And once I get that, then I stop. From there, we can move into color, and this affects the saturation as well as the hue. So if I drag this over a little bit, it's applying that adaptive saturation based off of the tones in the image. And I've also got a region slider there as well, which when I drag it up, you can see that there's areas, particularly around my eyes, that get a little bit desaturated. And I'm not sure if I really like that. So I'm going to keep that region slider region slider low, I should say. The saturation, I can bump that up maybe just a little bit, but I kind of like how there's this kind of gritty, almost desaturated look to the image, so I really don't want to boost the saturation that much. The hue slider here, I almost never ever use. And the reason why is because if you move it, it simply shifts all of the colors to kind of a little bit like the hue slider and the hue saturation adjustment layer in Photoshop. So again, this is not a slider that I do that much with, and I usually just leave it right at 0. Below that, we've got noise. You can suppress the noise. In this case, I really don't want to do that because when I start suppressing the noise, it's also going to suppress kind of the gritty texture that I really want. But again, that's an option that you've got available. And then you've got a curve tool where you can set a preset for a curve, such as something like a medium contrast when you get an S curve. In this case, dragging down my shadows just a bit, I think looks pretty good. Below the global adjustments, you've got local adjustments, which give you the ability to burn and to dodge your image, or to smooth, or do that sort of thing. You also have the ability to mask the changes that you've made already. And I'll be honest, I pretty much never use this section. Since I'm going to be moving the image back into Photoshop after I'm done here, I'll be able to do all of my masking and other editing there. So I don't really have a big use for this section. However, that said, it does have an edge aware brush similar to what you would see in Lightroom. So for those people that really like that tool, it is offered to you right within the plugin itself. And then finally, there's the finishing touches section, which allows you to add additional effects like diffusion, so I can make it look like it's blurred, or add grain, make the edits transparent, which I don't like to do because I can use the opacity slider right within Photoshop. I can affect the white balance, so I can make it cooler if I want, or warmer. In this case, I really don't want to do anything with the white balance at all. I can add a border or a vignette, or I can also tone the image using 4 different color regions. Again, this I don't have that much use for. So generally, if I want to apply a vignette to my image or a border to my image, that sort of thing, I'll handle it in Photoshop. But again, if you just want to do a really quick border, it's pretty simple to add, say, a small black border around it just with clicking on the checkbox and then setting the size, and you can select whatever color that you would want for your border as well. And the same thing for a vignette. You can pick your center, put it right there, and then simply change the vignette. And you can tell that I don't use this very often because I'm really not sure how this works. But that's, there we go, that's light, that's dark. So you can see that I can make the vignette more pronounced or less pronounced, as well as have a harder transition like that, or a much more soft feathered transition. But again, this is something that usually when I'm going to want to do that, I'll do that right within Photoshop. So once I'm done with all my Topaz edits, then all I have to do is click this apply button. It applies the edits. And then if I want to, I can apply another preset on top of what I've already done. So you can continually keep stacking your presets. However, in this case, I can also just simply get out of it and go right back to Photoshop by clicking OK right there. And then it applies the changes on this new layer, and it dumps me right back into Photoshop. So there's a few things that I'm going to do with this. First of all, I'm going to just drop the opacity of it just a little bit, because I think that the full opacity that I'm getting there is a little bit too harsh. The other thing about it is that it introduced a little bit of, while it really makes the stubble on my face stand out, it introduced this bit of patchiness here that I really don't like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask to it, and then with a brush, I'm going to simply paint with black over that area, and the flow is set to 33%, so it's going to be a gradual buildup just to kind of get some of that black out of there. And let's take a little bit of that out of there as well. So I can go through and tone down some of the areas where I think that it might be too rough or too gritty, just using a layer mask right within Photoshop. And so you really have a lot of flexibility, not only with the tool right within Topaz, but also once you bring it back into your host program, by using masking, by using any blend mode that you'd want to use, and by changing the opacity. You have a number of different ways that you can affect the way that that plugin is working. Now that that's done, there's one other thing that I want to do. I want to make this eye right here, I want to make the iris on that eye blue. And there's a very easy way to do that. I'm going to use a brush. First of all, I'm going to start on a new blank layer. I'm going to call this blue eye. I'm going to grab a brush, find a color of blue that I'm happy with, and I think that that one right there looks pretty good. And then I'm going to very slowly paint over my eye like this. Now this looks pretty bad. However, what I can do is I can take this and change the blend mode to color. And it looks like it bled over a little bit there, so I'm going to add a mask. I'm just going to mask off the top right there. Okay, what that color blend mode that I'm using on this layer did is it takes all of the luminance data from the underlying layers below it. So all of the texture stuff where you can see the structure of the iris and the pupil in the middle and the little highlight in the pupil. It takes all of that luminance data from all the layers below it. However, it takes the color data that I'm contributing from this top layer, and in this case, the blue that I'm using. Okay, so the color blend mode is very useful in this case for selectively coloring a portion of your image, or even for recoloring portions of image. Some people use it a lot on black and white images in order to selectively saturate it, or do a selective coloring effect. But that's it for now. If you're thinking about getting a program like Adjust, I'd encourage you to visit the Topaz website at www.topazlabs.com. That's it right here. As I said at the beginning, Adjust is currently 50% off, but that's only through the end of the month, and that's using the coupon code SEPTADJUST, which I have up at my website. So if you're thinking about it, what I'd recommend is going to their site, downloading the trial project, which you can use for 30 days. However, if you really like it, I would consider buying it before that price goes back up to $50 when you can get it for $25. So you're probably going to want to do that before the end of the month. But that's it for my tutorial. On Thursday, I'll be talking about the Liquify filter, which I'm going to be using to distort my image, and then using brushwork to create the explosion effect. Until then, my name is Nick Marzinski with TrappingLight.com. Thank you.